We begin the current Daf, Mesechtes Bava Kama Daf Peiches. We begin 4 lines down at the top of the Yamid, where the Gemara continues explaining the halacha of our previous Mishnah, which was continuing on the theme of the first Mishnah regarding the Chamisha Dvarim, that is an obligation when someone injures another person. And in our previous Mishnah, we discussed different types of chavalas and different types of people. One of the cases which the Gemara is going to continue with is if someone injures another person's Eved Kanani regarding the liability, because there's one of the 5 things that's a machlekes Tanaim regarding if there's boishes to the Eved Kanani. And the Gemara discuss in great detail that halacha. Shir corresponds to Mekadzach and Chazkel, turn to Daf Chaim, turns to today's Daf, Shbeischos v'Achin b'nei Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, and throughout the entire world. So we're discussing today's Daf are hachayvel be'Eved. Someone injures a slave, so that depends on whether he injured, first of all, Eved Ivri or Eved Kanani. They have different halachas. Because Eved Ivri is really like a regular Yisrael. Eved Kanani, as we'll see in the Gemara, is not. And also if Shaloi or Shalacherim, regarding if it's his own Eved, then it's his money, versus Shalacherim, if it's someone else's, well then it's someone else's money, then he's liable. The halacha that is discussed in today's Daf regarding if there's baishes for an Eved Kanani is the term achiv, where regarding the Chamisha Dvarim it says when kinatzu anoshim yachtav ish v'achiv, talks about achiv. So one opinion says, yeah, misha yesh achva. It's only someone that has a brotherhood, and Eved Kanani, a guy, does not have a halacha of achva. Whereas the other Tana holds, no, it has to be achiv b'mitzvahs, and the Eved actually has halachas of mitzvahs like a woman. And that also comes into discussion regarding a melech. Could it be a king? Could it be aid, a witness? Because all these use the terminology of achiv, and that the Gemara discusses regarding the same machlekes as it applies to those cases. Some of the other terms he comes in today's daf are nuchsi malug, property owned by a woman, her husband is entitled to its produce and profit, which gets us into a very interesting conversation regarding kinyan peres kinyan guf dami aloi, regarding when someone has the rights to the produce, to the utility. Is that considered like as if he owns the thing itself? Which technically it really is. If you say that, yeah, I own this, but you get to use it, let's say, so for the rest of our lives. So obviously that would be like I own it, because who cares who actually owns it? That also goes into the conversation regarding the husband, who also gets the utility of his wife's nichsi malug, who is considered as the rightful owner. So we begin the card Daf Peches, 4 lines down at the top of the Amid. We learned in our Mishnah, quotes the Gemara, Hachayvel be'eved kanani shel chayrim. If someone injures another person, another yid's non-Jewish slave. So Chayev v'chulu, the Tana Kama said, so he's liable for everything. And there was, however, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says, no, there's an exception of baishas. That ein lavada baishas, the slave doesn't have baishas, and therefore you're not going to be chayev for that one of the 5 things. So the Gemara explains now this machlekes tanoim between the Tana Kama and Rabbi Yehuda when you injure someone else's Eved Kanani, if you chayev in baishas or not. Says the Gemara, my time Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reason Rabbi Yehuda that there's no baishas? You tell me you chayev for nezik, tzah, ripui, shebas, all the different things when you injure someone else's Eved Kanani. Why is baishas different? Why is the shame factor different? So I'm because the pasuk says in Devarim, when it talks about this pasuk of Kiyanatsu, Anoshim Yachtab, you have 2 men that are fighting, Ishva Achiv, a man and his brother, and it goes through the pasuk talks about at the ends off, Vechzika b'mavushav. Talks about that the woman tries to save her husband from this fight of this other guy, and she grabs a hold of his shameful parts in the private area. So the pasuk talks about her liability for this shaming. But in the context of when it talks about this fight of the 2 people, for the halacha baishas, it uses the terminology of ish va'achiv, a man and his brother. Oh, that teaches us that specifically b'mishesh le'achva, only someone that has brotherhood, he's going to have the halacha of baishas. Yotze evet she'en le'achva. That excludes a slave who doesn't have brotherhood with a Jewish person, because as Rashi tells us, he cannot be Bob Bakal, he can't marry into the Jewish people as Eved Kanani, and therefore he doesn't qualify for achiv. Therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, the Eved is not going to have the halacha of baishas. Rabbanan, however, they disagree. Why? Because achiv hu b'mitzvahs is still considered his brother in mitzvahs, because any mitzvah that a woman is obligated, an Eved is obligated, as the Gemara teaches, Chagiga Daf Daled, says the word la by the woman, says la by the shifcha, just like la by the woman is she is mechuyev and mitzvah say. Meaning, let's say so too is the evet has the same halacha, so he is achiv, and therefore the Tana Kama said that there is going to be halacha baishas by the evet. So wait a second. So that's the machlekes if a slave is called achiv or not. El miat, if that's the case, Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who tells us that he's not considered as achiv, zoymei eved. What's that? Witnesses that tried to prosecute a slave to say that he's chayiv mises bezdin. Turns out that these edim were zoymen. They were false witnesses, and people did hazama to these witnesses. Lo yaroigu. Those witnesses should not be executed. Why? Because what does the pasuk say in the Varm? It says, "Vasisim law." You're going to do to them these false witnesses. Kasha zamam lasas la'achiv, like he plotted to do to his brother. Wait a second. It's only for someone that qualifies for achiv. Why is the halacha as a brisa teacher Masechtas Makos Daf Ches Beis tell us that an evet is like Yisrael regarding Mrs. Bezdin, and that another Jew will get lashes or go into exile because of an evet? Well, why? Why would there be a halacha bazama to these edim on an evet if an evet would not have the halacha of does not have the category of achiv? Doesn't qualify. It's only that he's zamam lasas la'achiv, and you don't have achiv over here. So why would the edim zaymin get this punishment? So it's a good question, but Omakra, the pasuk at the end over there says, we have a special ribui, meaning extra words, that says, and you should get rid of the bad of amongst your midst, meaning these edim zaymin have to be prosecuted, which tells us mikam makom, in whatever the circumstances is, and that is, so therefore, that even if it's regarding an eved, and maybe generally we would exclude them with the word achiv, we have a special ribui, that if you said false testimony regarding an eved, you're going to get that punishment. Okay. But the Gemara continues to move on regarding this machlekes. Again, if it sounds like the machlekes, if it's achicha or not, which the Gemara is telling us it is, so if that's the case, l'rabbanan. According to Tana Kama, who said that a evet is considered achiv, like we said, achiv b'mitzvahs. So evet yeh kashel malchus. The pasuk says, "Mikedav achicha tasam alecha melech." Amongst your brothers, you should appoint yourself a king. Okay, you just told me an evet is considered achiv. So that's the case. So the evet should be allowed to be the king of the Jewish people. And we know that's not the case. Why? Why can't an evet be the king? So they said, according to your reasoning, tikshalach ger. Then a ger, meaning even though his birth and his conception was in holiness, that you should ask l'divrei hakol, according to everyone, meaning even according to Yehuda, he would agree that a ger has achva. He's considered your brother for all halacha. The guy, his parents were Megayer, and his parents were not Jewish, but he's a regular Jew in all things, and still he's possible to be the king, and even to be just a governor on the Jewish people, unless his mother was Jewish, as the Gemara tells in Yevamos stuff in Hayim Beis. So that's a question according to everyone. So don't ask just like regarding the halacha of Eved, according to the Rabbanon. You could ask even according to Yehuda that why would a ger not be kosher? Ela makra, rather because the pasuk says Nevarim mikerev achicha. It doesn't just say mi achicha tasmalech melech. So what does it mean mikerev achicha from amongst from within the midst of your brothers? It means mimuvcha shebachicha. It means from the chosen ones of your brothers. So you're right. Although let's say the Tana Kama would hold that he's considered achiv, and according to Yehuda for sure, ger is considered achiv. But that's not enough to be achiv. You have to be mikerev achicha, which would tell us from the best of your brothers, and therefore that's why an evet and even a ger is possible to be the melech. Okay, but the Gemara continues to ask, if that's the case, let's move on to another context. Rabbanan. According to Rabbanan, again, which they hold that an evet is considered achiv. Yeh evet kosher le'edus. A slave should be valid for testimony. Why? Because the pasuk says in the bottom, it says, "Behine, behold, aid sheker ha'ed," that he said false testimony. Sheker rana ba'achiv, he responded falsely regarding his brother. So we see when the pasuk talks about edus, it used the terminology of achiv. Now, eved, you told me, is considered achiv. So why would an eved be possible to say testimony? So Ula says, no, edus lemitzisa amret. And here we get into a little bit of a lengthy discussion. You cannot say, as you're asking according to Tanakama, who says that eved is considered achiv, you cannot say that an Eved could be an aid. Because even though you're right, we're not going to learn out that he's invalid from the word achicha, because you're right, according to the Kama, an Eved is considered achiv. But asya edus b'kavochem isha. I'll tell you, kavochem, if I'm a woman, that an Eved is going to be possible for edus. Why? Because like this. If a woman, a regular Jewish woman, she's fit obviously to marry into the Jewish people. Psula le'edus, she's invalid to say testimony, like it says by Edim Zayim, it says, V'amdu shnei ha'anashim. The two men stand up. Shabraisim Mesefta Shvus, Daf Lama teaches that the pasuk is talking about by witnesses, but it sounds like it says shnei ha'anashim, two men and not women. So we know a woman is possible for edus. So Eved she'nei love b'kol, so a slave that's not fit to marry to the Jewish people. Ain't a din possible edus, isn't there kavachayim? Of course, it can be invalid to say testimony. So you're right. Achiv, it's including. But it's not. He would be included with that. It's not excluding it from there. But Kavachayim tells us that Eved is going to be possible for Edus. He says, wait, not so fast. It's not a Kavachayim. Because Mali Isha, what are you comparing to a woman that, yes, she's not able to say testimony, she can inudu yulamo, lamila. She's not fit to have circumcision, as we know, and anatomically speaking. What are you going to say by a slave who is fit for circumcision? Maybe that gives him the upper hand, and therefore he would be valid for testimony. So a minor will disprove this because sheyeshna b'mila, an 8-day-old baby has circumcision. Upasla edus, because we also know a minor is invalid for testimony from the same words, because it says anoshim. Anoshim means both men, not women. Also means men and not children. And moreover, Rashi says another svar why cotton is possible for edus is because to be a witness, it has to be Eidur Shato Yochel Azima. It has to be possible that we can do Hazama to you. Problem is, a minor is under Bar Mitzvah, he doesn't get oinjin, doesn't get punishments, and therefore he can't do Hazam, you can't give him the punishment that he wanted to do to someone else. That itself would invalidate him from the testimony. So therefore, those are two reasons that we know a minor is possible Eidus. So a minor has Mila, and you see still possible Eidus. Don't tell me that the reason why we would say Eved would be able to say testimony, even though it should be Kavachame from Isha, because Isha doesn't have Mila. That's not as smart to say, yeah, because we see that a Katan has Mila, and he's also possible Eidus. Says, no. Malakatan chain the mitzvahs. What are you comparing? Yeah, a minor is possible Eidus, even though he has bris Mila, because it's not a bar mitzvah. It's not mechuyev the mitzvahs. What do you say regarding a slave that he's obligated in mitzvahs, at least like that of a woman, but he's obligated in mitzvahs? Says, no, Isha will disprove that. Because she's also in the same mitzvahs as an Eved, upsula edish and zipasla edus, and yet she kash love b'kal, and still she's possible edus. Okay, so v'chazadin, so logic goes back and forth and says, okay, lo yrizeh kerizeh, lo yrizeh kerizeh. In other words, each one doesn't have the exact same characteristic. The woman and the child are not exactly the same, but outside of Shavashaben, what's the common denominator between the two of them? She can in b'chol mitzvahs that they're not obligated in all the mitzvahs, only some of them, because a woman is obligated in negative prohibitions and punishments, and the child is at least in the mitzvah of bris milah, and upsulan laha'id, and they're still invalid to say testimony. So I'm going to include also the slave. She'ein b'chol mitzvahs is also not included in all the mitzvahs in the Torah. Upasla, and it's going to be possible to say testimony. So says the Gemara, no, it's not a good kavuchem still. Because malat tarashavah, what are you going to learn out from the common denominator of woman and child? She can in a ish. No one of them is a ish. They're not a man, not as age and not as gender, and therefore you cannot qualify for shnei ha'anashim, which is the pasuk that says by edus. What are you going to say by a slave? He's an ish. He's an adult and he's a man. So maybe he should qualify for shnei ha'anashim and to say that he could say edus. So the Gemara falls off from this source and says elatesa megazim. I could learn that the Kabbalah that Eved is possible for edus from a robber who is roll over Bakal, he can marry into the Kila, and he's still possible edus. Like it says in Shmois Chav Gimel, Atashas Yadcha B'Goyim. In other words, don't make a wicked person who's a robber into an aid. And if he's possible to say edus, even though it's a ish, and he's mechuyev mitzvahs, and he has all the things, and he's roll over Bakal, and still he's possible edus, for sure, we should say Eved. So think about, really? Malagazan, what are you saying? A robber that is possible Eidush again Maisav Gamalai. His actions caused him to be possible because Sakazlam is a robber, he's a Rusha. So that's why he's invalid. What are you going to say regarding a slave? Nothing that he did cause him to be invalid. Why should it be invalid? To say Edus. The Gemara comes out, you're right. We're learning for a common denominator of a robber and one of the other ones, which the common denominator of them is, and the wording is very unique, like Rashi brings down. The wording to say that the common denominator, one of the other ones, would be she'enam zehirin b'chol mitzvahs. They're all not zohir, careful if you want to translate, in all the mitzvahs, but that's not really true. I mean, zemim nei rishay says Rashi, zemim nei shaloi nitztava. So the Gazlan, he's mechuyev in all the mitzvahs, but he's not zor in all the mitzvahs because of his wickedness. He's a robber, and the cotton or the isha is because they're not commanded, but they're not zor b'chol ha-mitzvahs. So that they share a commonality, either from choice or from tzivui, barak upon him, and they are invalid to testify. So Eved, who's also not zor b'chol ha-mitzvahs, because he's only mechuyev mitzvahs like that of a woman, for sure is also going to be possible, and he's not royal b'kol, and they are royal b'kol. For sure, it's going to be possible for Edus. That's one source that the Gemara brings. Another source, for again, if just to keep cheshbon, we're in the middle of talking about, because we spoke about the Chavala and the Eved Kanani, Fichayv Baishas, because it says in the pasuk Ish va'achiv, we have this machlokes Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda, if an Eved is achiv, and by Edus it says achiv, so we're trying to figure out why is it that it's going to be possible for Edus if he should fit into achiv. So we just brought one pshat because we know it from a kavachaymer from Tzara Shava of Gazlan and Isha or cotton. And now the Gemara brings another pshat. Mar B'rei Ravina, he says Amakra. The pasuk says in Devarim, Lo yumsu avos albanim. Literal translation is that fathers should not die on the sons, and lo yumsu al pi avos, and it says two ways, as we'll see shortly, and it says lo yumsu vanim lo yumsu al avos. So says the Gemara, what does this mean that fathers should not die on sons? It means lo yumsu al pi avos, that other people should not die through fathers she'ein lem chiyas banim, that don't have relationship with their sons. What does that mean? Meaning no other person, like the translation sounds like that fathers shouldn't die for the sins of their sons and sons shouldn't die for the sins of their fathers. That's like how the simple translation is. But the Gemara is darshaning that no, it means lo yumsu, that other people shouldn't die based on what is being said of avos, of fathers who does not have a yichus with his sons. Now, who is that? Who is it that his son is not miyuchas and called on the father? Is an Eved. An Eved, Canaan, we don't view them as if they have any yichus at all with their, in contrast to a regular guy, we don't view as if he has any yichus with his father. Now, because these Sagadat Hebrew think to say that this whole pasuk is Kedam Rinan is like, as we say in Mesechta Sanhedrin and Daf Chav Beis, that we're coming to invalidate relatives, which is Lo Yumsu Avos Albanim. What does that mean? That fathers should not die on sons, meaning Pe'edus Banim, through the testimony of the sons. A father shouldn't die Albanim through his sons testifying on him, because a Karev is possible Edus. If that's what the pasuk was teaching, Lichter Rachman, the Torah should have written like this: Lo Yumsu Avos Al B'neihem. Fathers should not die through their sons. My banim. Why are you saying banim stam? You should have said b'neihem, which are their sons. Shmamino, it's teaching me two things. That a second halacha is the yumsu api avish shein lemchias banim. That people shouldn't die based on the testimony of fathers that don't have relationships to their sons. Who is that? That's an Eved. We see that an Eved is possible for Edus. This is the drasha that Ma'abarei Ravina is bringing, how to translate this pasuk to tell you that an Eved is possible for Edus. The Gemara says, wait a second. If that's the case, let's go to the next words in the pasuk. It says, "Uvanim lo yumsu al avis," and sons should not die on their fathers. Hachanami here also it means lo yumsu al pi banim, that other people shouldn't die based on the testimony of sons she'ein lem chiyas avis, that don't have a relationship with their fathers. El ger hachanami the pasal edus. A ger, a non-Jew who converts, also is like a cut and shenayel dummy. He has no relationship with his father. So are you telling me that he's going to be pasal for edus too? So they said, no, hachihashta, how could you compare the two? Ger, a convert, although you're right, he doesn't have a relationship upwards, meaning from his father, like it says in the pasuk in Yechezkel, "V'zirma susim zeramtam," that it says that the seed is like that of horses. We don't view the non-Jew related to his father. Now, Rashi says there is a pasuk actually in Malachim Beis that says Baladun ben Baladun. We actually do we give yichus for a goy. We say who his father is, like there is yichus. Says Rashi, importantly, like the Gemara says in Bava Kama Daf Beis, that's only when he's a goy. A goy taka is miyuchas achar avav, not an eved, not a kanani, but a goy taka has yichus after his father. But when the sons are megayer, then he's not miyuchas after his father anymore. And we're talking about a ger over here. So you're right, although a ger doesn't have yichus upwards, but lamata yesh lechias, but downwards he has yichus, his son, the ger's son, is called based on his name, so that's why he's valid for testimony. Lafuki ever that excludes a slave, then lechias loy lamala beloy lamata. A slave has no yichus for zan tata, and not for his own son. Okay, but I thought I'm bringing a pasuk that the second half of the pasuk is sounding like that layumsu banim alavas. That okay, we have two psukim, we have two verses. One is avos albunim and bunim aluvas. So one's excluding maybe the eved, and one's excluding the ger, because the ger also doesn't have yichus. Azin was hot yichus from zan tata. Says the Gemara, no, because the Isa Gedait of ger pasal edis. If you would think to say that a convert is invalid for testimony, mean that you're going to darshan avos albanim, that for sons that don't have chiyas from their fathers, that they cannot say testimony to have someone else die. Wait a second, why would I need both halves of the pasuk? Lichte brachmana, the Torah should have said only the first half of the pasuk of layumsu avos al b'neihem, that fathers should not die based on the testimony of their sons. Look at them reading like we said, to invalidate relatives. In other words, layumsu be'edus banim, that in the first half of the pasuk it should have just said not banim. It should have said b'neihem. Like we said if all it was teaching about was the primary psul of relatives saying testimony, it should say b'neihem. We said it says banim to tell you, oh no, another halacha, that not only the psul of relatives, but also the psul of eved saying testimony, that it's a person that the fathers have no yichus with their sons. Lo yumsu be'edus banim, that it means that they shouldn't die from the testimony of their own sons. Then the Torah should have written at the end of the pasuk and switched the wording there, and it should have said ubanim lo yumsu alavis, meaning that the way it has it written, which it doesn't say al avisehem, the pasuk does switch it, and it says ubanim lo yumsu alavis. The shaman minot trei, that would teach you two things, because it doesn't say avisehem. Chada would teach you, first of all, number one, that sons should not die with the testimony of their own fathers, psul of krivim, of kirvis. The other halacha from the fact that it says avis and not avisehem is liyumsu al pi banim she'en lam chiyas avis, that it will validate that you cannot have someone else, a third party, be executed based on the testimony of sons that don't have a relationship to their fathers. Who's that? That's a ger. A ger, a goy, that, yeah, as a goy he has a yichus. But when he's Megai, we said that he has no yichus achar aviv. So that's what the end of the pasuk should be teaching me, a psul of a ger. Now, ve'eved nafkele b'kal v'chaim a ger. I wouldn't need the first half of the pasuk to teach me when it says liyumsu avos albanim, to teach me an ab that has a yichus to his son to invalidate an eved, because I can know it from a kavachim from ger from the second half of the pasuk. Umar ger kaziva kama de lamalu dein lechias. You're right. Although he doesn't have a yichus, a relationship upwards, going back to his father, but downwards, meaning his progeny, his children, he has a relationship with, he's considered connected and associated with. And still, Pasal Eid, is he telling me that the second half of the pasuk is teaching me that he's invalid for testimony? So Eved she'ein lechias. So a slave, Knecht, that has no relationship, not upwards, not downwards. In the Din Shei Pasal Eid, isn't it Kavachem that this is a person that's invalid for testimony? So Ella rather the Kasvach Mana, Yumsa Avas Abanim. Rather, when the first half of the pasuk says that Yumsa Avas Abanim, the mashma, which it sounds like Yumsu Alpi Avis She'en Lechi is Banim, that like we said, because it doesn't say Bneihem, it says Avas Abanim. So what's that teaching me? That you can't listen to the testimony of someone, a father who has no relationship to his sons, which invalidates what? An Eved. Shmami, no, we can infer from this that Eved, a slave, Shein Lechi is Leila Ma'alav Leila Mata. A slave who has no relationship, is not going upwards, not going downwards, who the Pasal Eid is, he's going to be invalid for testimony. And the diuk is only him. Of a ger, but a convert, even the Yeshlechi is Lamata, since he does have associations with his children. So Kashal Eid, he's going to be valid for testimony because this way there's no Kabul Chaimer. So therefore, that's how we know that a ger is kosher for Eidus. But then the Gemara says, wait a second. If you're going to say the obvious question, well then Lichter Brachmana, then the Torah should have written in the second half, Uvanim lo yum so ala beisehem, that children should not die through their fathers, which is the primary thing the pasuk is teaching me regarding the psul of kurva, of relationships, that a father is not allowed to testify about his son. Which was the question we had asked originally. Well, why does it say stama, not obviously him, it says avis? The mashma, that wording sounds like, because you're making the same drush of the first half of the pasuk, that you're not allowed to have someone else be killed through the testimony of sons that don't have a relationship to their fathers, which sounds like that's excluding a ger. So why are you saying avos and not avosayim? Says the Gemara, no, I did the kasav. Since the first half of the pasuk teaches lo yimsu avos albanim, since there we wanted to teach you two halachas, not only that the fathers cannot be killed through the testimony of their sons because it's the psul of kurva, but it's also teaching me the psul of eved, that you cannot have someone else be killed through the testimony of a father who has a relationship with his son, which is a psul of eved. Because of nami uvanam lo yum salavis. For symmetrical purposes, we kept the second half of the pasuk also the same way. But really, you're right. We could have written Avisehem. But one thing is clear. We said it cannot be that the second half of the pasuk is also teaching me a similar thing, that we're excluding someone that ein lechias avav, which would exclude a ger. Because then why are you saying in the first half of the pasuk the same idea to make that drasha to exclude an eved when you would know it from a kabel chaimer from the end of the pasuk? So therefore, says the Gemara, no, must be the first half of the primary. That's we're learning a psul of eved, and then once we said the same terminology of others, so we're going to say banim, or meaning banim. So we say others, but really we could have said abaysehem. You know, halacha the Mishnah. So again, this was basically the we had said that we had this machlekes in the Mishnah regarding if this boish is by an eved kanani, because it says the word achiv. The question was, is an eved kanani considered achiv or not? On the one hand, he's not because he can't marry into the call. On the other hand, he is because he's achiv b'mitzvahs. That was machlekes on the common Rabbi Yehuda if he's going to be chayiv for someone injures someone else's eved kanani, be chayiv on the boishes or not. And we said many different questions, saying, okay, achiv. There's a few different halachas and psukim that say achiv. How do we understand it according to the man Amma that says he's brother or not? And the last one was regarding edus. Says edus, hini eid sheka on the ba'achiv. So evet should be included. So that we had two pshatim, either that we know it from a kavachama from Gazlan and a woman or a cotton, to say that if they're possible for sure, the evet's gonna be possible. Or we learned it out from a pasuk of leumsu aves albanim, means that people should not be killed through fathers that don't have a chius, a yichus with their sons, which that excludes an evet who does not have a chius with his sons. And then the question was, but then what about a ger with the second half of the pasuk that we explained that that's only because of symmetry purposes that we said there uvanim lo yumsal avos, but it's not excluding that of a ger. Now the Mishnah continued and said, again talking about the chavolis of the when you injure someone, when you have an interaction with a deaf mute, you're fighting with a mentally deranged person or with a child, the encounter is bad because, like the Mishnah said, if you injure them, you're going to be chayiv, but if they injure you, they're going to be pater. So Gemara brings a story that Imei de Rav Shmuel bar Abba Mahagrunya, the mother of Rav Shmuel bar Abba from Hagrunya, Havas Nesiva le Rab Abba, got married to Rab Abba. Kasvesinu le Nichse, she wrote over her Nichse Milug, which is this. There's a few different types of assets that a woman could own. One of them is Nichse Milug, which is she owns it, and her husband has the ability to utilize the items or get from its profits. So she went and wrote off her Nichse Milug l'Rav Shmuel bar Abba Bra, to her son. Meaning after she had married Rab Abba already, she wrote off as like a gift to her son Rav Shmuel bar Abba. Now, Basa the Shchiva, after she passed away, as we continue to Beis, Azal Rav Shmuel bar Abba. So this Rav Shmuel bar Abba, who again had been, his mother had wrote off, gifted her Nichse Milug to this son Rav Shmuel bar Abba, even though she was married to this other Rab Abba. He went Kamed Rab Yirmi bar Abba and Ukme ben Nichse. You remember, he looked at the star, the mama had geschrieben, said that, yeah, Kol Nichsei sheyeshli min Nichse Milug, ani koisev lebonai, and he says, oh, okay, the mama wrote off to you, you could keep it. Also, Rab Abba, so Rab Abba went, this was her husband, Rab Abba, he went, because a husband inherits the wife. So in his this Rav is saying that his stepson gets it. So Azra Baba Amr Lamilsa Kamed Rav Hoshia. He went to his Rav Hoshia. Azra Hoshia Amr Kamed Rav Yehuda. So Rav Hoshia went and he said it in front of Rav Yehuda. What's going on over here? So Amalei said Hachya Mishmul. He quoted teaching of Shmuel. If a woman sells or gifts, like we're saying here, she gifted it to her son. Woman sells from the Nichse Milug, B'chaye Baila, which was in this case, her husband, Rab Abba, was alive. And Umeisa, and she dies, which is what happened, this woman dies. Habal Moitzi Miyad Alakuchas. The husband could remove it from the buyer. Why? Because a husband inherits his wife, because as the Gemara tells in Bava Basra, the husband is, so to speak, the first loikeach. He's the first buyer. Because whatever his wife has, he gets to use it. So he bought it already. So although there's like other buyers, you're too late. The moment he gets married to him, he's the first one. Now when she dies, he gets it. So therefore, essentially, he was trying to say that the psak is that the son, Rav Shmuel bar Abba, doesn't get it. Her husband, Rab Abba, gets the Nichse Milug. So the story continues. Amru Kamed Rabbi Yirmi bar Abba. So they said this over. Rabbi Yirmi bar Abba. Remember, he was on the paskin for Rabbi Shmuel bar Abba that he gets to take it. And now they said over to him, saying, I just want you to know, this other Rav, he said that the man gets it, and not the son. Amalahu, he said to them, and again, remember that Rabbi Yehuda, who said this psak, was quoting Shmuel. So Rabbi Yirmi Abba, who is being refuted, he says, Ana masniti dan, ich weiß a Mishnah. You're quoting me on Amayra Shmuel, I quote a Mishnah. That nan, what does the Mishnah say? Mishnah is above Basra. Meaning, during his lifetime, the father says, I'm writing all this assets to my son for after I die. So that's what's called, like Rashi calls, meaning the property itself, I'm giving over to my son from today. But I don't want to be out on the streets, I don't want to be on the welfare. The father will eat the peiros. I get the utilities, says the father, until the day I die. But I'm writing it off to my son right now. So the halacha is like this. Haben en yochel limkar. The son can't sell this property because they're in the possession of the father, because the father is still keeping the rights to use it until the day he dies. Now the father also cannot sell it because he wrote it over to the son. The son already has the kinyan haguf. He already owns it from today. So neither of them is allowed to sell it. Now what happens if they do? If the father sells it, so then the halacha is that mechuchen at sheyamas. So then they're considered sold until he dies. So the buyer from the father could eat the peiros, could have its utility until the father dies. When the father dies, then the son goes and he takes it away from the buyer, because remember, the father really has the rights here only until he dies. Mochra ben, what happens if the son sold it? So the buyer has nothing over here until the father dies. Because remember, the father is holding on to the rights till he dies. The son owns it, so he could sell it, but until the father dies, he's not getting anything. Fine. But this is the main point. Kimayis av mia, but one thing is, when the father does die, you're telling me it's the likeach, that the son's buyer is going to be able to get it. And the Gemara explains, the avagav the meis haben b'chaye av. Even if the son died while the father is still alive, that it never even came, quote unquote, to the possession of the son, because although on paper he wrote over to the son, but the father still held on to all the rights until he dies. And if the father dies and then the son is still alive, okay, it comes to the son. The son already sold it. So okay, I can understand that Lekech would get it. We want to say a bigger chiddush, that even if the son died before the father died, that even then, the Lekech of the son is going to get it. How so? That's specifically Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. That's according to one opinion, that of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Why? Dama, he says like this. He says, Loishna Mesa ben B'chayav. It says, doesn't make a difference if the son died in the father's lifetime. That it doesn't come to the possession of the son. Loishna Mesa B'chayav ben. It doesn't make a difference if the father died when the son was still alive. Also, they have the ben that it does come to the possession of the son. Either way, the buyer is going to acquire the rights, because that's only specifically according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, because the we learned is actually machlokes. Mochra ben b'chayav. This case, the father, if the son sells it when the father's still alive, Mesa ben b'chayav, and then the son dies when the father's still alive. So Rabbi Yochanan says, no, he says, no, the buyer is not going to get it, because the son never got it to ever sell it off. Because if he's still alive when the father's dead, then he'll get it and then it'll go over. But here he dies when the father's still alive, the buyer has not acquired anything. Shlokashami says, no, the buyer did acquire it, as the Gemara explains. And this is important, the principle that the Gemara is explaining. He says, no, the buyer did not acquire anything, because Amalach, he would tell you, when did the Mishnah teach? This Mishnah we're quoting here in Bava Basra. Mochar ben, that if the son sold it, the buyer did not acquire it until the father dies. But we said, okay, but when it sounds like when the father dies, and the buyer gets it, is Doloi Mesa ben B'chayev, says Rabbi Yochanan. That's only if the son didn't die when the father's still alive. Also, ben. Okay, ultimately he came to the son. And as Rashi explains, okay, whatever the first one is selling to the second one is every rights that he gets. So now that the father died, he gets it. That's what I sold you, and now you're going to get that. That makes sense. But if the son died while the father's still alive, it never came to the son. So Kimayas Av, when the father dies, Nami less lekech, the buyer's not going to get anything, because I can't tell you what I didn't get, and I never got it. So therefore, there's no way that you're going to get it, and therefore the son died, then he's not going to get it according to Rabbi Yochanan. Now, it says the Gemara, what's that principle? Alma, we see Kosover, the Rabbi Yochanan holds, and this is something that's brought many times in Shas, this Machlekes Rabbi Yochanan Shlokish, Kinyan Peiros, the acquisition of the utility, which remember the father had for the Peiros, and all the while, and the son even died while the father still had the Kinyan Peiros, is Kikinyan Hagufdami. It's essentially like owning the object. We don't care who actually owns it. Whoever gets to use it is the one that owns it. So therefore, v'chizavan, where that means when the son sold it, lavdi day zavan. He didn't sell what was his. Well, you say, what do you mean? I thought the father wrote off on paper. He gifted it to the son. Yeah, but what is that? That's garnished. Because the father had kinyan peiros, which is like the kinyan guf. And therefore the son never got it. It was never boliyadai. He never had anything. And therefore that's why it says Rabbi Yochanan, the lekech's not going to get in that case. On the other hand, and this is really what we want, because we really set a principle, and we say we're only from Malakish, and we pull back. We say, "What's this machlokes?" Hyperlink. So tell me, what is this machlokes that we're talking about? That you tell me is going specifically to Malakish? Is this next opinion? Shimon Malakish, he says, no, kan lekech. The buyer is going to get it. I'll explain to you why. Because Kiktan must need ben. When did the Mishnah Babasa say that if the son sold it, the buyer doesn't get it until the father dies? But like we said, the diuk is, the inference is kimayas av. When the father does die, miyas islukech, then the buyer gets it. Says Rish Lakish, loishno, it doesn't make a difference. Loy mesa ben b'chayav. Even if this, let's say this, okay, if the son doesn't die in the father's lifetime, okay, the yasla the ben, it came to the possession of the son. The loishno, and this is Rish Lakish's opinion, it doesn't make a difference. Mesa ben b'chayav. Even if the son died while the father's alive, the other depend that it didn't come to the hand of the son. Kana loy keyach. The buyer did acquire it. Oh, says the Gemara, Alma, what do we see? Because some of the Rish Lakish holds, Kinyan Peiris, even though the father had the rights, the acquisition of the utility, love Kikinyagov. It's not like the father owned it. Hey, Kensisnitzen. That's not mean, doesn't mean you own it. So therefore, when the son sold it, who he had the Kinyan Ha-Guf, not the Kinyan Peiris, he owned the thing. Yeah, the day Kazavin. So even though it never quote unquote came to him, what do you mean? Of course it came to him. It was the father wrote it off to him, and he owned it, and that is continuing the ownership, and therefore he sold his own thing even though he died b'chaya. Okay. Now, Banan Hashta says the Gemara, us now, Bein Yir B'Yir Bar Abba. Remember, he was the Rav that paskin from Shmuel Bar Abba, that the son was going to get what his mother had written off to him when she had already gotten married to her husband Rabbi Abba. Ubein Rabbi Huda, who he's the other Rav, who paskin, no, it goes to Rabbi Abba, the husband, like he quoted from Shmuel. Says the Gemara, both of them, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Shvi'ulahu. They both hold like Rish Lakish, because like Rashi tells us, the halacha, although when he disagrees with Rabbi Yechanan, is generally like Rabbi Yechanan, there are three places we pass in like Rish Lakish. One of them is this halacha over here of Kinya Peiris, Kinya Guftami. Oh, okay. So then what's their machlokes? If they're all holding like Rish Lakish, that the Kinya Peiris is Kinya Guftami, so is Lavka Kinya Guftami. So what's the machlokes? It says the Gemara like this. Bava Kama Rabbi Yirmiyah Abba. Rabbi Abba said like this. He was the first one that spoke. Remember, the Shmuel Abba came to his Rav, and he said like this. He said this idea. If you think to say Kinya Pes kicking of Dami like Rabbi Yechanan, so Kimayis Av, when the father dies, but the son died while the father is still alive. Then why would the buyer get it? Kikazaman Hai, meaning if we paskin like Rish Lakish, which we do in this halacha, he was proving that must be he holds, right? Because when Kizaban Hai, when this guy sells, he didn't sell his own. How could Rish Lakish, how could we paskin like this? How could Rish Lakish say that even when the son dies b'chaya av, that we're going to say it's going to go? Obviously, he says we see Kinyan Peiris that these nichse milug that were bought that there was a Kinyan in her lifetime, that there was the husband had Kinyan HaPeiris, obviously lav Kinyan Gufdami. Obviously, as we proved just before in the Gemara, that if the son sale is going to go through, must have been that it's not Kinyan Haguf, that the father had Kinyan HaPeiris that doesn't share the Kinyan Guf of the son. So then that's the same thing. Then the gift that she made to her son, even though she died in the lifetime of her husband, but his Kinyan Peiris is lav Kinyan Guf Dami. So it was hers to sell, to give to her son. Give it to the son. Give it to Rav Shmuel Bar Abba. Because the husband's Kinyan is only Kinyan Peiris. Kinyan Peiris, I could prove, Rish Lakish we paskin like, is love Kinyan Guf Dami. So the woman has the one who has the Kinyan Guf. So she could gift it off to her son. That's what the halacha it should be. I mean, we're comparing these two cases. He's just proving that Rish Lakish, which we already did in the previous Gemara, but he's just spelling it out that, must be that Rish Lakish holds kinyan peiros lav kinyan guf dami. Why else? Why else would it be if the son sells and then the son dies b'chayav? Would that sale go through? Must because the father's kinyan peiros is lav kinyan guf dami, and therefore the kinyan guf is like the son's. Oh, so that's the same thing here in this case too. That the mother, although her husband Rababa has the kinyan peiros, that's not kinyan guf, and therefore what she wrote off to the son is going to work. But says the Gemara, but Adru lekamid Rabbi Yehuda. But however, they went when this story, as we're explaining now, in elaborating that when they went then to Rabbi Yehuda, Amalu he said to them, Hacham Shmuel. This is what Shmuel said, that Zu ina dema lemishnasenu. This is not similar to our Mishnah. Yimri Abba was quoting a Mishnah. He says, I know a Mishnah. He says, no, this is not similar to our Mishnah. Maitam, what's the reason? Why is it going to the husband? Rabbi Yosef, he says, Bishleimi tani ipcha. We understand if the Mishnah would have been written, if it would have been the opposite way, the case of the Mishnah. Hakosev nechasev la'aviv. If someone, the case of the Mishnah was that someone wrote his nechasim to his son, lachamaisa, and that was the case we had discussed regarding if the son sells it or the father sells it. So had it been the other way around, someone wrote off his assets to his father, that after the son dies, the father should get it. And the father sold it when the son was alive, and the father died when the son was still alive. I mean, the same case, just the other way around. And Rish Lakish would have told us that Lekech would be kaina. Then you could prove the kinyan peiros, that the acquisition of the peiros, which is acquired to who? To the son. Because remember, he wrote off the guf to the father, but the son still holds on the rights to use it. Then you could prove lav kikinya guf dami, because that's the same. It's the same thing. But he's going to show you why in our case you can't prove, even though we pass like Rish Lakish, you cannot prove that kinyan peiros is lav kikinya guf. You know why? Because elahash the diktani. But now the case in the Mishnah teacher Bava Basra is a case in the chasab lebenai. Someone writes off his estate to his son. Oh, okay. So there I understand that, the buyer is going to acquire it, even though it never came to the son. You know why? Because he's fit to yarshin him. So although in general, the kinyan peiros of the father is kikinya guf dami, over here for sure, the father acquired to the son when he's still alive, that he could sell it when he wants to, because if la'achamisa, anyways it would have yarshin him. So he's giving him over more than what he generally does. So you cannot prove from the halach of our Mishnah that he holds kinyan peiros is lavke kinyan guf dami, and therefore you could hold kinyan peiros is kinyan guf dami. And if that's the case, that means in our story the husband Rababa, who has the kinyan peiros, is kinyan guf dami, and therefore the mama had no rights to give it off to her son, Rabbi Shmuel Barabba, and therefore the husband's going to get it, because you can't prove from Rish Lakish that kinyan peiros is lav kinyan guf dami. Abaya says, then what do you mean? What is this chiluk you're trying to make in the case that it says of a kais in the chasam lebenai versus a kais in the chasam le'aviv? What atu bra yoris abi? You think a son inherits the father? Abba lo yoris bra, and the father doesn't inherit a son? And what do you mean? Says even if the case would have been taught the other way around, he also would have said that the reason is because the father's role yarshay. Ella rather, and he's trying to prove a point. Obviously, when the son writes his assets to his father, he has his own sons, and this that he's writing his nechasim to his father is lavrechinu lenichsim mibreikos. He's trying to chase it away that his children should not inherit it, and when he dies, that his children should inherit only his father. So had it said the opposite, you obviously would have said over there that the buyer who bought from the father would have acquired, that the reason is because kinyan peiros that the son has is lavke kinyan guf dami, and when the father sold, he was selling his own. So then here also, if someone writes his nechasav lebenai, for sure that means he has other sons too. So you're trying to tell me that had I said the other way, then you could have spared for a shlakish that must be holds kinyan peiros lav kinyan guf dami. Then the same thing here is also he's trying to chase away from the other brothers, meaning from the other sons of the father that he has. That's why he's writing it to this son. And if that's the case, that you say that lekech is going to be kind, then you do prove kinyan peiros lav kinyan guf dami. So we're really back to the question. You really could say like the way Rabbi Yirmiyah Barabba said. So we're back to the question: why is Rabbi Yehuda paskening that Rabbi Abba gets it? Why is it not similar to the case of our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. It's mishum takanas usha. The Rabbi Yisrael Chanina says, "But usha is kinu, and usha they instituted it, even though in general that you're right, like Rish Lakish, kinya pays lavke kinya guf dami." But a husband, specifically in his wife's assets, the rabbis strengthened his lien because of hatred. A husband and a wife is going to cause fights, and we made him like the first buyer. And that hoisha shemachra benichse miluk, if a woman sells from her nichse miluk, from her assets that she owns the property, b'chaye baal in her husband's lifetime, and umeisa, and she dies, abal moitzi miyad halakuchas, that then the husband could remove it from the buyers. You're right. Although in general you did prove me and you had a beautiful shtickle teira, why it should be that really Rabbi Shmuel Bar Abba the son should be able to get it because we say kinya peiros that the husband has a love kinya of them, and it's true. And that you could prove from Rish Lakish, and that's one of the three halachas we pass like Rish Lakish. So therefore, it should sound like that Reb Shmuel Rabbi the son should be able to get it because the husband's kinyan is not so strong. It's lav kinyan gufgami. However, the husband is different. Aman is andrish because in Usha they were masakin that even if a woman sells something off which she has rights because it's her own thing, the husband's going to get it. We made him like the first buyer, and therefore, because of Takanas Usha, that is why this case is going to be different. And that's why it belongs to the husband of Abba and not to the son. Thank you to any time for those things.